Thank you. The next item of business is a statement by Angela Constance on Sentencing and Penal Policy Commission. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and therefore there should be no interventions nor interruptions. And I call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to provide her statement. Up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In my statement to Parliament on the 3rd of February, I announced my intention to lay regulations to change the automatic release point for some short-term prisoners to 30% of their sentence. I am taking this action because the prison population remains unsustainably high and to ensure that the prison estate is safe for those who work and live there. This decision was not taken lightly, and public safety and the protection of victims remains a priority. Before making regulations to change the release point, Scottish ministers must by law consult a range of named organisations as well as any other persons they consider appropriate. The Scottish Government wrote to the consultees after my statement to Parliament last Tuesday, and 28 responses were received. There were a broad range of views expressed, and it will not be possible to outline all of this to Parliament today, but in the interest of transparency it is my intention to publish responses shared during the consultation where permission is given. My officials have written to respondents to seek their permission to share responses provided. In general, there was a recognition of the impact and risks of a high prison population. Some respondents felt the proposals were necessary to mitigate those impacts. Others wanted the focus to be on longer-term reform to address underlying drivers of the prison population alongside an analysis of measures undertaken. I will say more on the need for this change to be delivered alongside longer-term reform today. There was also a range of issues raised by consultees, including a need for clearer information on release arrangements for victims and the wider public, to support public protection and to manage the impact on demand for public sector services and the community, and consequently the impact this could have on the outcomes for those being released. I have listened to these views, and I and my officials will continue to work with stakeholders on all aspects of delivery. The Scottish Government and the Scottish Prison Service will work with victim support organisations to raise awareness of these changes and to encourage those who are eligible to sign up to the Victim Notification Scheme. All registered victims where a release date changes as a result of this legislation will be notified of the new release date in advance. It is critical that partners have time to plan and prepare support for people leaving custody. That is why the changes will not take effect until after the early emergency release scheme ends in April. And those eligible for immediate release will be released in tranches to help manage the impact on community services. I am committed to reviewing the impact of these changes next year. Presiding Officer, I have always been clear that there is no single or simple solution to an issue which has been faced elsewhere in the UK and beyond. There are, however, solutions that do not compromise public safety, and as a Parliament and a society we need to discuss how we achieve a system where justice is served and the right balance between effective community justice and imprisonment is struck. I am therefore pleased that the Independent Sentencing and Penal Policy Commission published its final recommendations last week, and I am grateful to the Commissioners and the Chair, Martin Evans, for the diligent work that they have carried out. This detailed report offers us a clear opportunity to rethink our approach as a country. By following the evidence, we can continue to safeguard the public and prioritise victims while accepting that simply increasing the prison population does not make Scotland safer. A renewed focus on prevention and reducing reoffending will lead to better outcomes for individuals, communities and our justice system as a whole. I will set out today the Government's response in principle to the most central recommendations, but more in-depth consideration of the 73 recommendations will be required. Ultimately, it will be for a new Government and Parliament to make decisions on the changes that are needed. The Commission has recommended a prohibition on sentences of less than 1 year, subject to clarity on legislative competence, and extending the presumption against short sentences to sentences of 2 years or less. We will explore this carefully and engage with the UK Government, as some short sentences are for reserved areas of law. However, I note that the UK Government has also introduced a similar presumption. Whilst there is a longer-term trend away from shorter sentences, a high number do continue to be imposed. In 2023-24, 73% of short-term sentences were for less than 12 months and a further 15% under 24 months or less. We know that community sentences can be more effective in reducing reoffending than short sentences, which can disrupt lives and adversely affect employment opportunities, stable housing and access to healthcare. Indeed, the reconviction rate for those given community payback orders in 21-22 was 28.4% compared to 52.6% for those completing custodial sentences of 1 year or less. However, as the Commission points out, if greater numbers of people are to be sentenced in the community, victims' interest, safety and confidence must be central, and this shift must be accompanied by clear safeguards and credible measures that protect victims. I agree with the Commission's observation that investment is needed to underpin delivery of high-quality community disposals. This Government will invest a further £10 million in community justice services in 2026-27, taking our total investment to a record £169 million. This increase builds on additional investment of £25 million over the past 2 years, underlining this Government's commitment to strengthening community justice across Scotland. We will also focus on simplification, flexibility and enhancing support in line with the recommendations, recognising that tailored and targeted interventions addressing the drivers of offending behaviour can often be more effective. Presiding Officer, the Commission also recommended explicitly excluding the possibility of remand where there is no real prospect of a short custodial sentence. Significant progress has already been made via the Bail and Release from Custody Scotland Act 2023, which introduced a new bail test aimed at ensuring remand is used as a last resort. We are seeing an increase in the capacity of and confidence in alternatives to remand, with a total of 1,500 bail supervision cases in 24-25. Again, I note a recent change made in England and Wales to apply fewer exceptions to bail where there is no real prospect of an immediate custodial sentence, and we will be able to learn from their experience. Presiding Officer, the Commission recommends consideration of different uses of electronic monitoring technology. There has already been sustained progress, with almost 2,500 people electronically monitored on any given day. Scottish Prison Service expect to make use of GPS for home detention curfews in the next few months, and we will consider where else that technology can be deployed. The Commission also makes a clear recommendation relating to the release point for long-term prisoners. As I have previously stated to Parliament, I remain committed to reviewing that to achieve a better balance between time in custody and time spent in the community under strict licence conditions as part of a person's overall sentence. Having looked at the evidence, the Commission considered that extended supervision would be beneficial to the management of risk as well as for reducing reoffending. We will carefully consider the Commission's recommended option of reverting the release point of 2/3 as was in place prior to 2016. Presiding Officer, as the Commission points out, Scotland is not uniquely criminal and should not inherently have a higher prison population than any other countries. They have provided us with the opportunity to make bold, evidence-based changes across the justice system, and I once again thank them for their commendable work. We must be open-minded and collaborative, as other countries have been, and where safe, appropriate and more effective alternatives to prison exist, we should use them. The evidence clearly shows that a high prison population does not equal a safer society. Instead, these recommendations can support a reduction in reoffending and therefore a continued reduction in crime, something that we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which time we will move on to the next item of business. And it would be helpful if those members who would wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons. And I call Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. Presiding Officer, I'm amazed that a government which has insufficient time to consult on non-fatal strangulation or to consider a prostitution bill deems a 3-day consultation with 28 unpublished responses as authoritative. But it speaks to the knee-jerk, unstrategic response to a prison crisis of the SNP's own making. Indeed, in response to Theresa Medhurst telling the Justice Committee yesterday of the risk of a catastrophic failure in our prisons, the SNP will this afternoon vote through what Medhurst says is a budget allocation short of what we need to reach the full range of delivery agenda, give much-needed improvements and ease current pressures. So, Cabinet Secretary, firstly, given that Martin Evans cautioned against the mass early release of prisoners as so-called emergency schemes that return inmates to the community without adequate support increase the likelihood of reoffending, does the Cabinet Secretary acknowledge that prison's early release was the wrong thing at the wrong time? Secondly, across Scotland last year, 800,000 hours of unpaid community sentence work remained outstanding. So what evidence shows a mass influx of new criminals will improve those numbers, or indeed the outcomes? And finally, the Cabinet Secretary insists that short sentences don't work, yet is reducing the time served to only 30% of a sentence, i.e. more short sentences. Isn't this just another example of the confused, muddled thinking which permeates this government's response to the prisons crisis?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I recently received correspondence from Mr Kerr on the same vein as his questions to me today. And of course what I've heard today is of course knee-jerk quotes and response to a substantive piece of work. And the question for all of us in this chamber is that if we do not want to have to continue to make decisions on short-term emergency measures, we have to find a space and build a consensus around what the longer-term solutions are, bearing in mind that the evidence points to that a high prison population does not equate to a safer Scotland. And what I don't hear from Mr Kerr, other than some policy language about the need for a cohesive long-term holistic strategy, and then as soon as there's an attempt to do that, he dismisses outright all solutions, because it sounds to me as if the Tories really don't want to find a solution. In terms of his specific questions, the consultation was necessarily short for reasons that I have explained, and because I was mindful of the need for good parliamentary scrutiny. In the coming year, with the budget, if it passes, there will be £1 billion invested in prisons. And in terms of his questions about community payback orders, I think we all know, or certainly anybody who understands how community payback orders work, when people have been instructed by the courts to do 200-300 hours of unpaid work, they don't do that in all week. So at any given time, there is indeed outstanding hours. And of course, the use of community payback orders is increasing, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Pauline McNeill.
Scottish Labour is concerned about how the public now view sentencing in Scotland's justice system, because there have been constant changes to how long short-term prisoners are kept and what time they spend in our jails. Communities are feeling uneasy and finding it difficult to follow how sentencing actually works in Scotland, because now, only a year ago, short-term prisoners served 50%, and today, or soon it will be 30%. So we know it is driven by high prison numbers, but I have to say that I've listened for a long time about successive Cabinet Secretaries talk about alternatives to custody. So I do think it's fair to ask what groundwork has been done in those 19 years, what long-term thinking have they done over the period that you could confidently say that you've got robust alternatives to custody. Now, the Sentencing Commission, and I thank them for their work in this, is recommending that sentences of up to 2 years potentially. Now, the Government is considering looking at short-term sentences of a year or less. But what I want to ask the Cabinet Secretary, if any serious long-term thinking has been done, can she say with confidence that if she is thinking of implementing this 1 year with electronic monitoring, can you fully implement that? Can you implement it soon? And does that mean GPS technology? Because I think that's at least the first step, because you have some confidence in the Government's thinking around this.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, where I agree with Ms McNeill is the point she raises around public understanding around sentencing in Scotland and the structures of sentences that prisoners serve. And I do accept that point, and also the points raised in the Commission's report about improving public understanding of how sentencing works, because I think that's crucial in terms of confidence. But in terms of increasing public confidence, we also have to be prepared to step back from campaigning and also build that consensus. We have to build a consensus in this country around what actually works to keep our communities safe, and we owe that to the communities that we seek to serve, and that we owe that not least to victims. And I speak as a Cabinet Secretary who has written parole reports, who has supervised community payback orders, and I'm also the Cabinet Secretary who has increased investment substantially in community justice services. And if this budget passes, in total I will have increased it by £35 million. And if you look over the past decade or so, you will see an in excess of 50% increase in investment in justice social work. In terms of the points around technology, while all these matters need to be carefully considered and managed, again, it is important that we build on the progress made, the substantial progress that's been made around electronic monitoring, and take it to the next level, because I do believe that is important in terms of reducing reoffending, but also increasing victims' confidence.
I call Rona Mackay, followed by Sharon Dow.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the vein of what we've just been talking about, it's been acknowledged by the Cabinet Secretary and the Commission that victim safety must be at the centre of sentencing policy. So if changes to the justice system are being implemented, what assurances can you give that this will be done hand in hand with public safety?
Always through the Chair, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, protecting victims and the public from harm is and will always be our absolute priority, and that is consistent with our aims for community justice. As a government, we have seen crime reduce, and we all want this to continue so that we have fewer victims and safer community. And the evidence shows us that community justice can be more effective than short custodial sentences in terms of reducing reoffending and assisting with rehabilitation. However, we are also clear, as I said in my statement, that if more people are to be managed in the community, then victims' interests, safety and confidence must be at the heart of those changes. And if society is to have confidence in the system, clear safeguards and credible measures would need to be in place. And I think that's an important point to reiterate following exchange with Ms McNeill and others on the importance of electronic mechanisms.
Call Sharon Dow to be followed by Jimmy Hepburn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. New figures published today by the Scottish Grocers Federation show that 99.6% of convenience stores now experience shoplifting daily. Almost 4 in 5 report increased violence, and over 3/4 of staff suffering mental health issues as a direct result of retail crime. With the presumption against short sentences, has the Cabinet Secretary effectively decriminalised shoplifting in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely not, Presiding Officer, because it's important to remember that a sentence in this country can indeed be a custodial sentence, but we also sentence people in the community either to attend supervision or indeed to undertake unpaid work. And I would also point Ms Dow, this may be of interest to her, that there were some interesting recommendations in the Commission about how to respond with prolific offenders, and perhaps what needs to be done there is around new and extended supervision arrangements. Ms Dowie will be aware of the work that we are doing in retail crime, which is important given its links to serious organised crime, but also, I would say, the cost of living crisis as well. And we are continuing to invest in the Retail Crime Task Force. I hope that would be welcomed by the Conservatives, because it's an important 9 million over 3 years, over the next 3 years, and that's an important point, and I hope a reason to support the budget later.
I call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Martin Whitfield.
As the Independent Commission examined how Scotland can achieve a sustainable prison population, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the report's recommendations can serve as a useful contribution towards a wider societal discussion about how we can achieve that end?
Cabinet Secretary.
In short, yes, I do, Presiding Officer. I've always been very clear that whilst the steps taken by this Government have been necessary to provide immediate relief to ensure prisons are safe and effective, a long-term change in our approach to custody is needed to strengthen the justice system and align Scotland with other Western nations who have tackled this issue successfully. This is a complex subject which there should be no knee-jerk reaction to, but a sensible, considered, mature discussion that should be taken forward based on the Commission's evidence and based on the report that we have seen, to ensure that we get the balance between ensuring justice is served to victims, public safety remains paramount, and our prison population is sustainable.
Call Martin Whitfield to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. In the Justice at Work report, emphasis was put on the importance of rehabilitation, but we've heard today that release is going to take place for some prisoners after only 30% of their sentence. The quote from Theresa Medhurst about the ageing estate resulting in catastrophic failure also included a comment about the bottleneck on the very rehabilitation services that we're talking about. So is it not the case that this proposal is setting up prisoners to fail, but more importantly, putting communities at risk, where prisoners are going to be released without rehabilitation while we shift to a community sentencing?
Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate Mr Whitfield's interest in this, and particularly his interest in rehabilitation. It is important to recognise a couple of factors: that the vast majority of short-term prisoners are released under no compulsion and they're automatic release with no supervision. And there are very important safeguards in this measure, in that there are some offenders that are excluded from the release programme. But what we have found with previous release programmes is that the return to custody has varied between 5% and 13%, and that is because of the extensive work by partnership organisations, justice social work, the third sector, in really supporting the prison service to, when they identify those people who will be released earlier. These are all people that are returning to our community, and the pre-release work that's been done by Upside Justice Social Work actually speaks to the future about what we should be doing more routinely with short-term prisoners.
I call Fulton McGregor to be followed by Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Commission makes several recommendations with an emphasis on the importance of prevention. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that effective prevention policies require a cross-portfolio and integrated approach to take account for the impact of varying societal factors such as health and housing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, Presiding Officer, and we know that people in contact with the justice system experience multiple and severe disadvantage. Intervening at the earliest stage, ensuring effective education, access to healthcare, housing and other support services are all vital aspects to preventing crime in the first place, which ensures safer communities and less victims. And that's why, for example, our vision for justice is aligned with the promise and recognises the importance of partners working together to ensure appropriate support and intervention is delivered. And we also know that early intervention can allow individuals to address a full range of needs which contribute to offending or the risks of offending behaviour, and all of that is in the wider interest of our communities.
I call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her statement, and I'm grateful to Martin Evans and the Commission for their detailed and well-evidenced recommendations. There is substantial evidence that poverty poverty, trauma and inequality drive offending, and the negative lifelong impact of incarceration on women and other marginalised groups. Given this, and following on from Fulton McGregor's question, will the Cabinet Secretary commit to clear whole-government engagement that links justice reform to anti-poverty and public health strategies? And will she also ensure that equalities impact assessments of high imprisonment rates, early release measures and the possible reforms to come in, particularly on women, young people, disabled people and racialised minorities?
Cabinet Secretary.
There was a lot in Ms Chapman's ask. I will make her the commitment that I will take that away and I will respond to her formally in detail. But the point that she makes about inequality is well made. We need a whole systems approach and the report by the Commission is challenging around what more needs to be done around embedding prevention.
I call Liam MacArthur to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of her statement. Scottish Liberal Democrats have long been clear that investment in community sentencing is vital if we're to tackle the staggeringly high prison population in Scotland. This is both unsafe and unsustainable. So I welcome the Commission's report, and whatever the makeup of the next government, it will need to review and take forward the recommendations appropriately. In order for these measures to be effective, however, they must command the confidence and consent of victims, courts, the police and communities. So can the Cabinet Secretary set out what engagement she believes will be necessary with stakeholders to ensure these reforms work in the interests of victims and communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to Mr MacArthur for his comments. It is important that all these recommendations are given careful consideration, prioritisation, and that we must do this work alongside all of our justice partners. And I'm happy to engage further, because the point I made earlier around building a consensus about what works to make our communities safer is something that I've campaigned for most of my adult life.
Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given the value and importance of community payback orders to reducing reoffending, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that those released early from prison should undertake work in the community for the time they would otherwise have served in jail? For example, when one looks at the rubbish scattered along the verges of our trunk and country roads, I'm sure several hundred extra pairs of hands tackling it would make a huge difference while helping offenders to pay their debt to society productively.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, that is a really good question and a really interesting point. So while community payback orders and unpaid work are currently an alternative to custody, they are a sentence in their own right, and we don't currently have the legal powers to impose another sentence on a sentenced prisoner. There is some very interesting work that was undertaken in Denmark, where they released over 3,500 people from prison via a community service programme. So there is much to learn from our European friends and neighbours in this regard, and I think that would help also to alleviate concerns and any public concerns.
I call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Emma Harper.
It's good to have some honesty from the Cabinet Secretary on this matter, because this really all arises because of the SNP's total mismanagement of the Scottish prison estate and the justice system as a whole. And when the Cabinet Secretary says that a high prison population doesn't equal a safer society, that is illogical, because removing dangerous and violent criminals from the streets does make those streets safer. Of course it does. It's illogical to suggest otherwise. And I can tell members where the public are with how they view these things. They view the SNP justice policy as soft touch, lenient to the point of pandering to the offenders. And even the Commission report picks that up in its contents. So I ask the Cabinet Secretary, how can she possibly repeat the phrase that victims and community safety are a priority for the SNP when they're busy releasing serious criminals back into the community?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the vast majority of prisoners will one day return to our community, and it's beholden on us all to make sure that they return to our community in a far better position to lead a life and to make a contribution. And our justice system, at a very fundamental level, yes, it's about prevention, it's about punishment, it's about deterrence, but it's also about rehabilitation. And with the greatest respect to Mr Kerr, and I would happily have a further discussion with him about this in detail, because I know that he will have very strong views and experiences of the justice system. But we have to have the honesty to look at the evidence and engage with people, yes, discuss, debate, but act and decide on what will work to keep people safe.
I call Emma Harper, followed by Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the issues that have been raised already regarding reoffending, whilst prison sentences will always be required, evidence does show that community-based sentences do reduce reoffending and relieve population pressures, including at HMP Dumfries, as well as the costs of prisons on the public purse. So, does the Cabinet Secretary have any comparison figures for retaining someone in the prison population as opposed to a community-based sentence?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, some of these comparisons are quite difficult to make, but as I've said before, the annual cost per prison place in 2024 to 25 was £52,260. So investing in community sentences rather than short custodial sentences to deliver both justice and to reduce reoffending, in my view, is a more effective use of taxpayers' money. And that's why, with the budget upcoming, that I will invest a further £10 million in community justice services, taking our total investment to £169 million.
And I call Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary support the report's bizarre madcap proposal to rebrand automatic early release as, quotes, supervised reintegration? And if she has any hope of making the streets of Scotland safer, shouldn't she pursue this simple plan? Build more prisons.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Conservatives, as per usual, are always tough on rhetoric and soft on solutions. And you know, we are building more prisons in Scotland. But the problem with the Conservatives is that they want to put all their eggs in one basket, and that is in a prison building programme. Look at the evidence. Look at the evidence. There isn't one cause and there isn't one solution to this. So we need to get serious. And I live in hope. I know Mr Kerr yesterday, Mr Kerr the Younger, referred to me yesterday as Pollyanna. But you know, I live in hope, Mr Kerr, that there will be some people, even on your benches, that will see sense, indeed perhaps even see common sense, and be prepared and have the courage to follow the evidence about what will actually work at the end of the day to make our communities safer. The evidence shows that a high prison population does not equate to a safer Scotland. And in fact, if other countries can make reforms on their prison population without compromising public safety, why can't Scotland?
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the statement. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Allow front bench teams to change position. Thank you.